what if understanding Bitcoin wasn't just about learning something factual, but about breaking old patterns that have quietly shaped your life? In this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I'm joined by Brian Dixon. He's the CEO of Off the Chain Capital, an investor and thinker who challenges the deepest assumptions about money, belief, and the forces that hold us back.
Every so many years, there's a massive technological upgrade that creates a fundamental re-architecture of someone's consciousness and of reality. And I think Bitcoin is one of those things. The internet was one of those things. The printing press was one of those things. Mobile computing was one of those things. And now we're seeing it with, Bitcoin, artificial intelligence are two huge topics.
This conversation might just change the way you experience yourself and the money paradigm that you grew up in. I really enjoyed this conversation with Brian, and I hope that you do too. And if you do, please like and subscribe here on YouTube or follow me on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. All right, now let's dive into this conversation with Brian Dixon. All right, Brian Dixon, welcome to Bitcoin for Millennials.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on. We met in Vegas. Was really fun. We did a panel together, and I remembered I saw you on a podcast with Robert Breedlove, and I really enjoyed how you talked about the philosophy side of Bitcoin and consciousness. And so, I'd love to dive into that with you in this conversation.
That'd be great.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe we can start with, just to set the tone probably. When did you first recognize that Bitcoin was more than an innovation of money, this technological progression, but more something philosophical or even spiritual for you?
For me, I learned about Bitcoin by accident. So it was back in 2012. I was finishing up law school at the time, and I was in a wills, trusts, and estate class. And the content for that is rather dry, as you can imagine. So during class, I was not paying attention. I was just surfing the internet. And I came across this article where the military, I think it was the U.S. military, was giving fighter pilots some type of new pharmaceutical drug that was allowing them to fly extended missions with no food or water. So it was basically like turbocharged Adderall or something like that. And in the comments section of the article, somebody's like, where do I buy this thing at? Like, where do I get this medicine at? And then somebody writes, you got to send Bitcoin to the manufacturer in Mumbai, India. And the person goes, what's Bitcoin? And they go, read this. And it was Satoshi's white paper. They linked the article. And, I had no interest in like the pharmaceutical. I was just curious, like, what's Bitcoin? I've never heard of it. So I clicked the link and it opens up the white paper and I read it while I'm sitting in class. And I did not have a technology background, did not understand Bitcoin's technology after I read that. But for some reason, it was very interesting to me because for my whole life, I've been what most would consider a big conspiracy theorist. And over time, you think you learn that a lot of these things become conspiracy facts as opposed to theories, depending on which ones you're looking into. But I've always been so fascinated by that. And one of the things I learned about many, many years ago from a documentary film I watched called Zeitgeist. There's the movie Zeitgeist.
That's the first word that came up in my mind. I knew you were going to say that. That's
Zeitgeist? Yeah. So
yeah.
I watched that movie, I think it came out in like 2007 or 2008, around that time frame. And I watched that film, and the film has three components of the documentary. The first one is the astrological allegory of religion, and the middle section is around 9/11, and then the third section is around the monetary system. And the scam that the monetary system is, right? And central banking. And I've always, after I watched that was a very eye-opening film for me. And I did a bunch of research on our monetary system and how central banks actually operate and realized they're just a massive Ponzi scheme at the end of the day. And when I read the Bitcoin white paper, something about it pulled me back to thinking about the movie Zeitgeist that I had watched several years prior. And I kept reading the white paper. I went home and read it again. And for some reason, over the course of a week or two, I probably read that thing 20 to 30 times. And I still, even after reading it 20 to 30 times without having a tech background, I did not understand proof of work yet. I did not understand the technology in and of itself. But what I did start to wake up to, which I think was the fundamental, paradigm shift for my mind, is if a system like this evolves and works, there's the separation of money and state, similar to how we did the separation of church and state many years ago. And that was my big light bulb moment. And then I started going down every like Reddit forum I could find or YouTube video I could find. And back then there wasn't a lot of content, right? It was like Andreas Antonopoulos that was doing his talks in different places. So I watched a lot of his content. And then over time, the more and more I studied it, the more interested I became in it. And the big shift for me was a philosophical shift for me, because I was thinking, if this system ultimately catches on and gets adopted, we will have a monetary system governed by mathematics that's in an open source format, as opposed to a group of men standing around a table deciding monetary policy, which is just inherently corrupt over time, right? And the ability to print money to infinity. And ever since we went off the gold standard in 1971 in the United States, when President Nixon took the US off the gold standard, the money's been backed by nothing except the full faith and credit of the US government in this particular situation, which is at an all-time low, right? The trust in government. And that to me was a very eye-opening thing. Like I looked at that as rebuilding our global financial system on a mathematical backed governance system that just didn't exist. And that had the ability to have so many positive benefits. Like as an example, one of the biggest reasons that we wage war and have the ability to continually be in these forever wars around the world is the ability for a central bank to print money and fund these contractors, right? And if you're constantly in conflict and this money is constantly being printed, one, we're losing a lot of lives, which is terrible. Two, our money is constantly being inflated and devalued over time. And there's so many other ripple effects beyond those two things. And I looked at Bitcoin as this very, very unique solution to that problem. So when I first learned about it, to me, it was very much a philosophical shift that if this works, it's something that's going to be totally revolutionary for our lifetime. And I look at things that like every so many years, there's a massive technological upgrade that creates a fundamental re-architecture of someone's consciousness and of reality. And I think Bitcoin is one of those things. The internet was one of those things. The printing press was one of those things. Mobile computing was one of those things. And now we're seeing it with, Bitcoin and artificial intelligence are two huge topics. And I just think the underlying technology for Bitcoin, what it represents, the power that it grants in an open source forum is something that's we'll look back on many years into the future and say, this was something that was like the invention of fire or the invention of the wheel.
Man, so many things to pull on. And I'm also thinking I have all these questions for you, but this is already something that I think you can dive deep into, right? Like the first thing I'm thinking, awesome, you said zeitgeist. Actually, like last week, I was thinking about it. I saved it in my watch later. Like, okay, I gotta watch this stuff again. I actually read the white paper also again, like two weeks ago. So I love that you wrote it so many times. What I'm thinking is like, where is the discrepancy between? Because you kind of like went the other way around. So I think it's a good question for you between like understanding Bitcoin. Right? Like reading the white, like understanding how it just factually works, which I think there are many resources for to learn, basically, right? It's how I got in touch with Bitcoin. There's a video that just explained what Bitcoin was, how it worked. And so I kind of approached this from a different angle, more like the technological angle, like, okay, the internet should have a currency or something like that. And only way later, I connected it to this philosophical umbrella almost, right? That actually gave me more of the hooks to understand why this thing even exists in the world. So I love that you went the other way around. Why do you think it is so difficult for people to kind of connect these two, if that makes sense? Because now I do, like later, I do understand, you first need to understand the problem before you can even see a solution. That's of course very basic. But a lot of people come across Bitcoin as an investment or something technological, and there's all these better cryptos and whatnot, right? But how do you connect these two, and why do you think it's also difficult for people to see that?
I to answer this question too, I love the painting that you have in the background, because that's an illustration of kind of how what happened to me originally when I learned about this, and I spent about 3 months going down the rabbit hole before I had my big light bulb moment, and I probably had a similar thing happen to me that's on your painting.
Nice. Well, but, this is ChatGPT. You can buy it on the t-shirt in the shop. Bitcoin custody is evolving, and OnRamp is leading this change with multi-institution custody, eliminating single points of failure. Instead of relying on one institution, OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a cold storage multi-sig vault backed by 3 independent custodians, where no single party can move your funds alone, providing an unprecedented level of security. Your assets are protected by a 100 million Lloyd's of London insurance policy, with all transactions fully auditable on-chain and only executed at your direction. This means complete transparency and control over your assets at all times. Beyond custody, OnRamp provides comprehensive Bitcoin services that include trading, lending, inheritance planning, and IRAs. You can view them as your private Bitcoin banking partner tailored to your wealth preservation goals. Whether you're new to Bitcoin or an experienced holder, OnRamp's approach helps you secure your generational wealth with unmatched security and peace of mind. You can sign up at onrampbitcoin.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to receive $150 in Bitcoin after your first deposit. If you first want to learn more, you can also book a free consultation via their website to speak with one of their Bitcoin custody experts. Tell them you came through me, and they'll take extra good care of you. My American friends, I've got something for you. If you're into Bitcoin, you want to grow your stack in any way possible. What if you could do it effortlessly just by spending your fiat? The Gemini Bitcoin credit card is designed to help you do just that by giving you instant Bitcoin rewards on every purchase. Just use it like any other credit card and earn back up to 4% on transportation, 3% on dining, 2% on groceries, and 1% on everything else. There are no annual fees for this card and no exchange fees to receive your Bitcoin rewards. Sign up to get your limited edition Bitcoin Orange credit card and earn a $200 Bitcoin bonus when you spend $3,000 in the first 90 days. You can find more information and terms in the description below, or go to gemini.com/Bram to sign up today and start stacking effortlessly. That's gemini.com/Bram.
So why I think it's important to connect the philosophical component with the technological component is because they really integrate with each other very nicely once you understand them. And it took me quite some time in the early days to really understand the technology of it, because I didn't have a computer science background and didn't understand coding at the time. And the more I looked into it, what I thought was so unique about it and going down the rabbit hole was what Bitcoin really solved from a technical challenge standpoint is what's known as, in the computer science world, is called the double spend problem. And what the double spend problem is, something that Elon Musk, Luke Nosek, and Peter Thiel, the founders of PayPal, were actually trying to solve when they created PayPal. You can see video interviews many years ago of Peter Thiel talking about the early days of PayPal, and that they were trying to find a internet native currency that was free from the government and central banking cartels. They were actually trying to create Bitcoin, like something just like Bitcoin. But the challenge they couldn't figure out from a technology standpoint back then was this double spend problem. And what the double spend problem is that if I have value in an account on the internet and I want to send you a percentage of that value, and then I copy the computer code for that transaction and paste it and send the same value to another party, I've just digitally counterfeited that value, right? Because I've sent the same value to two separate parties. That's what the double spend problem is. So in computer science, it was very challenging. It was never really figured out how to solve that problem. And Luke Nosek, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk, since they couldn't figure it out in the early days of PayPal, what they decided to do ultimately was build PayPal on the traditional banking system rails. However, when Bitcoin was created, that's one of the most brilliant things that was actually solved with the technology. So with Bitcoin, since every single transaction is timestamped in a public immutable ledger, it doesn't have the same issue, because once a value is sent from one party to another on the Bitcoin blockchain, it can never be duplicated, right? It's there, it's immutable forever. And that was one of the most brilliant parts of this design with Satoshi, was that you solved that really, really important double spend problem. And from a computer science standpoint, this enables us moving forward to now have an internet native monetary system, which is, though the whole world's connected by the internet, you should have a monetary system that aligns, and we're able to send peer-to-peer outside the scope of the traditional fiat banking system. And why that's important is that itself is a fundamental shift in consciousness for how we're going to evolve moving forward, just as the concept of Bitcoin is a fundamental consciousness shift for the paradigm switch between a traditional central banking system and an internet native open source arithmetic system.
Well, and it's not only that, right? Because it is connected to the digital scarcity as well. right? Like those two things are very much connected, in a sense that if you cannot spend this double transaction, and the part of the coin or the coin that you own is really yours, that also kind of connects to making something digital tangible, also because it's scarce. I think that's also something that people find hard to grasp. I think you just gave a great example of, how a transaction goes like that. And basically, the crazy innovation for me, what blew my mind, is that it's just letters and numbers. Mm-hmm. So like they change, like just the ledger changes when you do a transaction, basically, right? So it's like, yes, oh, this part of a Bitcoin is not in this, combination of letters and numbers anymore. It's in this combination of letters and numbers anymore. So it is so profoundly simple, but the implications are so huge, right? Because I think it's the first time that actually something digital was also made scarce, absolutely scarce, verifiably scarce. And that's also why it allows, I'd say, the global use case in that sense, right? So there's all these little steps that added together eventually lead to why it's such a profound thing. But yeah, if you just think about it in like, oh, it's a digital token coin thingy that I hold on my computer, you kind of go past that. And I think, it takes time to understand this a bit more conceptually, especially because this tangibility is something that I think many people cannot grasp. Like, that is just really hard.
I agree. And to add on to that, the other thing I think that's incredibly brilliant in terms of its design is that for the first time in this digitally scarce component, like you noted, we have something where you have a physical, computing system that is doing the work to create and translating into a digital environment. And that's what proof of work actually is. And like, if we look at historically, like, let's say you're a gold miner, right? Like, what is your proof of work to earn your dollar that you do every day? You're going out in the mines and you're mining gold and you're refining that and you're bringing it to the market, and then you're earning a wage for that. In terms of this new monetary system, it's basically turned the ability for you to have electricity that gets translated into computing power that then gets translated into a digitally scarce monetary system. And I think many, many years into the future, we'll look back and say, wow, that was just such a remarkable invention to bridge both the physical and the digital world to create something such as this. And another thing I think people don't often think about with Bitcoin that's really, really important is think about, like, this iPhone as an example, right? We have this device where it connects you to people all over the world. And Apple is the company that produces these devices. And we know, and Apple does a variety of these devices, right? And how much is this worth? Well, we know how much it costs us in dollars to go purchase it. And when you think about how much value that adds from a company structure standpoint, we know what Apple's market cap is, right? One of the most valuable companies in the whole world, because it's created this very unique device that allows us to connect in computers and iPads and everything else. What people don't think about with Bitcoin as often is, what is the value of the largest computing system in the world? That's what Bitcoin is. It's the single largest computing system in the world. So we know what the value of a smaller computing system is when you aggregate them all up and put that in the market cap of an organization like Apple. But what's the value of the single largest computing system in the world? Like, what are the implications of that long term? What are the implications of how that creates geopolitical advantages for countries, or cybersecurity defense advantages for countries that are holding large stockpiles of Bitcoin? Like, it's going to expand far broader than what we can even conceive today, and new technologies and applications being built on top of Bitcoin that I think is still very, very much in the early phases. I'm excited to see how that plays out over time.
Yeah. One thing I want to add to that, the using physical energy to create something digital, that's also the first time ever for that to happen, right? So usually creating something in a digital space has no connection to the physical outside of the computer world, basically. And with Bitcoin, that is the first time that something that happened in the physical world actually results in something being created in this digital world, right? So this is the only digital asset, digital, entity, however you want to define it, right, that has a connection to energy expenditure in the physical world, which also was something that really blew my mind. So if we think about, all these little parts that eventually make up this very profound thing, in what ways do you see, the principles, values, use cases that emanate from Bitcoin that actually change the way people view consciousness, meaning, purpose? Like what is the human impact of Bitcoin existing?
I believe the human impact of this is going to span far broader than what we can really think about right now. But one of the initial things that always comes to mind for me is if people have a value system that allows them to hold their value, unlike the current system, right? People can't save. If you save money, you're never going to get ahead, right? You have to invest in assets and hopefully those assets grow. But since we have this new system called Bitcoin that allows you to store this value over significant amounts in time and space, I believe that'll allow human beings to pursue more creative endeavors than maybe they would have never tried to do before. And a great example is, what if you had this brilliant artist or this brilliant musician or comedian or whatever the creative endeavor is that somebody was just born to do. But historically, maybe the large percentage of those people chose not to pursue that creative endeavor because it was fear disguised as rationality, because they had to go get a job to support their family and make sure things were okay. So instead they went and became a lawyer or an accountant, even if they were the most brilliant musician in the world, right? And I think what it'll do is it'll open the avenue for more people to pursue their creative endeavors and have the ability to fail if it doesn't work out, because they can store their value over time and space in Bitcoin, right? If they're trying to do that in cash, it's much more challenging because the government can print, it can devalue the currency, and we know what that leads to. But it will allow people to, I think, go after opportunities that they're more intrinsically, pursued to do through like what their spirit is telling them to do or what they're passionate about or where their interests lie in life. So that's a huge fundamental shift, I think, that I'm hoping will be opened up, and Bitcoin will grant us that power.
I kind of translate that with, the concept of time preference from Safety, right? Like he says, like everyone has a high time preference, as in like the certainty or the future is uncertain, right? So you have a certain urge or a certain anxiety towards the future. But actually fiat money, because it loses value all the time, that accelerates the uncertainty towards the future. So you are very much incentivized to be a consumer today instead of a builder in the future. But in order to be a builder in the future, you need to gather capital to then allocate to whatever you want to do, right? So whether that is being a musician or an artist or having a some sort of venture or whatnot, whatever you want to build, a family, a home, you need to gather that capital and have at least the same amount of purchasing power into the future so you can create or actually build.
One of the ways to look at that is my last company I built before Off the Chain was a venture business where I funded a lot of startup companies and worked with them very closely. And one of the things that we would always train them to do is that it's okay to fail, but fail forward to the best of your ability, right? So if you do go after something and it doesn't work, figure out how to pivot and shift so you can still take those learnings and move it forward. However, in those scenarios, you had a capital expenditure you couldn't recoup back. And also the other capital on the balance sheet would just be in fiat. I think what's interesting about Bitcoin in this concept that you just laid out is that people have the ability to fail forward while capturing that value store still, right? So it's going to make people, I think, more believers in taking risks in life, hopefully.
Yeah, fully agree. So I liked what you said in the beginning about the conspiracy theory part. My view on it is that, well, conspiracy theory is a conspiracy fact. But I don't know where I got this from. I think from some podcast with some CIA spy guy or whatever, or maybe some older videos. But it's very hard to keep something super secret, like 100% secret, right? So the strategy is to put out some tidbits of truth and then just let people's imagination run, right? And so that's where the theory part of conspiracy theory comes in, because there are many theories about the same types of topics, because around that topic, certain, truthful things have been leaked. That's kind of my idea around it.
Yeah.
When we think about money, like yesterday or this weekend, I had a thread on Twitter with Grok, and I said, "Can you compare fiat money and Bitcoin and tell me what the probability is of either of them being a Ponzi, like what has the bigger probability of being a Ponzi, etc. Oh, we had this whole thread, had like 700,000 views, so it went like kind of viral-ish. And the funny thing is that when we go through it and people reply like, oh, this is so enlightening, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, this information is all out there. Like it is just in your face. It's literally in your face. This is just how it works. There's a small group of centralized people that control the value of the money that you are forced to use. And therefore, your time and energy that you expend and you get this money for are being stolen when it's devalued. That's the thesis. That's literally what we just said, right? And therefore, your uncertainty towards the future goes up, which makes you a consumer and not a builder. And that's where all your issues and struggles and problems come from, basically. So,
and when you're thinking too about one of the unique educational avenues that Bitcoin has opened up, in my opinion, it has dramatically expanded the amount of people around the world's ability to question what money actually is. Because for many, many years, it was a small group of people that actually understood it or spent the time to go research it and, probably bent more on the libertarian side of people's views, like what's going on with the government, what's its monetary system. But the vast majority of people never questioned money. They never questioned what inflation actually was and how the monetary system worked. So when Bitcoin has grown in interest and adoption and utility, the amount of people of all different age groups that have now stepped up and said, wait, this system that we're living in, this is how it works? Like, this is really what's been happening to us that they were just unaware before? I think that educational avenue that's been opened up is remarkable because people of all age groups now that spend the time to understand it are questioning that system and realizing, oh, wow, this is never going to be sustainable long term. We've been getting screwed for many, many, many decades, and now we need to fix that.
Mm-hmm. Well, this ties into the question I wanted to ask is, yes, but why is this belief in fiat money so rarely questioned by people? And to tie it back to your journey, what was it that made you challenge it? So eventually you read the Bitcoin white paper. That was your first touch point. Was that also the point when you started questioning, or was there something before where maybe during your study or something that you were already thinking, okay, what am I learning here? What can I actually do with this?
Yeah, if I date back to when I started questioning things pretty aggressively, it was when I was very young. And I remember being in church when I was a kid, and I'd be listening to the sermons. And I was raised in a Christian Presbyterian church, and we go to church every Sunday. And I remember listening to the sermons and looking at the scriptures from the Bible and thinking, is this all there is? Or is there much more to this? And then starting to be interested and curious about other religious texts and what were the things that were similar and what were the things that were different. And, why did some people think these were accurate where these were inaccurate? Also, when it comes to the Bible was basically constructed by Constantine. And he said, I want these books in the Bible and these books not in the Bible. So what about the books that were left out? Why were those left out? What was the knowledge in there that was intentionally secluded from the Bible? And so as I got older, I started questioning all these different things. And I was always kind of naturally curious about these different components, whether it was from the spiritual side of things or it was the government side of things. And then from a lot of books I consumed over time, I became very distrusting of the government very early on in life. And I think to answer maybe part of your earlier question is why people didn't look into this earlier. I think for many, many years, people thought, not everybody, but a large percentage of people didn't really think the government was out to get them. And they fully did not understand what was happening in the central banking system. If people want a really good book to understand how the central banking system was created, go read The Creature from Jekyll Island. That's a phenomenal book that basically shows how it was a small group of people that just kind of understood the system they wanted to design. They went off the grid and created it, came back, implemented it. And a lot of people, too, don't even realize that the Federal Reserve that issues the money is not a government entity. It's a private corporation, right? That it's works quasi-governmentally, but it's its own private corporation with its own governance and its own bylaws. And most people have never spent the time to actually understand it because they just think the government prints the money, it gets issued out. I spend time to earn this money for the value I contribute to society. I do my best to save it or invest it over time, but they don't really question what it actually is or how it's actually constructed. And I think over time, Bitcoin has been that big wake up call for people. And I think more, and our access to information, right, through social media and through the internet today, we have a lot easier avenues to actually find out about the information, test hypothesis, engage with other people around the world to have thoughtful discussion around things, and then develop hopefully better conclusions than what people were able to do historically. Because historically, before the internet came out, it was just books and word of mouth and telephone calls and things like that. So we didn't have the access and flow of information to really question these things and the ability to extract interesting viewpoints over them.
If you want to self-custody your Bitcoin stack, I recommend the Blockstream Jade Plus. I've been using this premium Bitcoin-only hardware wallet for a few months now, and I love its design and ease of use. What makes it stand out is its open source hardware and software, and Blockstream's unique genuine check, which makes sure that your device is authentic. No backdoors or compromises. You can connect with the Jade Plus however you want. Bluetooth, USB-C, or you can go fully air-gapped with its built-in camera for cable-free QR transactions. The metal case feels solid and the color screen is easy to read. And it connects with your favorite Bitcoin apps like Blockstream Green, Sparrow, and Electrum. Get your Jade Plus today at store.blockstream.com and use code BRAM to get 10% of your entire order. Let's talk about something that not a lot of people think about before it's too late. Where are you storing your Bitcoin seed words? Are they truly secure? I found my solution with StampSeed. It's an elegant all-in-one titanium plate solution with no separate pieces to lose or manage. Your seed phrase gets permanently stamped into pure titanium that withstands fire, survives water, and lasts for generations. Unlike shallow etching methods, StampSeed's patented tools help you to deeply stamp every letter for permanent readability, protecting your financial legacy. When you order a titanium seed plate from StampSeed, you can also upload a custom design or your logo to customize the back of your plate to make it fully personalized. Paper seed phrases are a disaster waiting to happen. Secure your Bitcoin with StampSeed for decades to come. Visit stampseed.com and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, to get 15% off your order. The Federal Reserve was, I'm clicking. It was founded in December 23rd, 1913. But if you want to go into conspiracy theories, right, there were two or three guys against it, right?
And they were on the Titanic that crashed right around there, right?
The Titanic that was owned by J.P. Morgan, yeah. So I think it's so funny. Some people listening will be like, "Whoa, where did this go?" But I think this is like a great example of this. Like, there's a truth that is just the truth, right? And there are there's a truth that these two or three guys were actual vocal opponents against the Federal Reserve. JP Morgan was connected to creating the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is a commercial entity that was also set up during this week of Christmas and stuff. And there was not, somewhere out in just rural America, etc. Right? So there are all these things that happened, but when you then put these things together, because eventually it's all about power, right? And what you mentioned before, there is an entity made up of a few people that basically rule over our lives because they influence the value of our money. That sounds insane when I'm saying it, right? But that is how it is, right? And even for me, like, I don't know, like 7 years ago, I would not have thought that I would say these things. But I think this is a fact. This is not even my opinion. Like, this is how it works, right? But I think just this, people find very, very hard to accept. The fact that it works like that, the fact that you are not as free as you think you are. Mm-hmm. How did you reconcile that? I mean, you can be curious and investigate all these things, just for your own interest. But at one point, I can imagine that you ran into a point where, it just changed your worldview or the way you operate.
Yeah. So for many years, as I questioned all these philosophical views and government systems and monetary system, for me, it was mostly just learning, educating myself and questioning them and finding lots of flaws in these various systems as I researched them more. But up until Bitcoin, there was really nothing you could do to opt out of that system, right? You could be upset about it, and you could be like, this is a terrible thing that's happening. But like, what are you going to go do? Protest in the street? That's not going to do anything. So, in my opinion, so the best thing to do was just like learn as much as I could. And I always had this weird feeling that like at some point in my life, there'd be something I'd be a part of that was going to help go against these traditional systems that I found were just so valueless and demoralizing and just terrible, terrible, imprints on our planet. And then I woke up one morning and recognized, oh, wow, I'm doing it right now, but I didn't even realize it because of what I'm doing with Bitcoin, right? Like learning about it, educating others about it, being a part of the system, help grow the ecosystem and scale it over time. And I realized like, wow, this is the very thing that for so many years I was questioning the flaws in these different areas of society. And just by what I'm doing right now, I'm actually have become a part of what that solution is. And I've always found that very fascinating because it's kind of like Bitcoin happens to be the thing that solves so many of these issues and re-architects that archaic system that's so wrong.
This is what people find so annoying when Bitcoiners say, Bitcoin fixes this, and it sounds so hyperbolic, right? It sounds so. If you view Bitcoin as just an investment or some token or something with crypto, etc., then yeah, of course that sounds hyperbolic. That sounds very snake oily salesman.
Yeah. Well, one way to think about it that's more tangible is like this. In 1971, like I noted before, President Nixon took the U.S. off the gold standard. There's a great website, and I believe it's called WTFHappenedIn1971.com. And when you look at that, you can see since 1971, all of these terrible things that have happened in all different areas of society since the dollar quit being backed by gold. So gold was a store of value that helped the dollar hold its value. But when the government removed that ability and created the avenue for them to print to infinity, all of these terrible things happened. Like there's the food supply and agricultural got really bad. People became more sick. Divorce rates increased. Like all these different things occurred. And that's a great website to look at. And the fundamental reason, if you trace it back, is because the dollar had the ability to perpetually lose its value now, as opposed to having a store of value backing it like gold. And Bitcoin is the solution for that because, a lot of people look at Bitcoin as a digital gold. So it is bringing that store of value back to the monetary system, which hopefully in time will solve a lot of those issues that were created starting in 1971.
Yeah. And I think what people need to see, this is a great topic, is, well, yes, you can create money for some time, more money than actually represents the available productivity. And that gives you great times, happy times, probably the 80s and 90s in the US, same in Western Europe, were probably, the best time to ever grow up, for us, for example, right? So that was all great, but it mostly benefits the people that are very close to this newly created money, right? Because they can spend it before, the first time you spend new money, there is no inflation. And only after that, the inflation starts to take hold or like in the economy, so prices will slowly go up. So I'm just like peeking on this website you mentioned. I think, this one is amazing, right? Like income growth from 1971 to now, like the bottom 50% of earners stayed flat, top 1% earners grew like eightfold, for example. I'm just scrolling. Like there's so many things. So yeah, people should look at this because you get some prosperity of it, but it is disproportionate to what the people that are closer to the money creation actually get from it. And once you realize that it's been going on for 50 years, I think you can also start painting a picture as to how much wealth is effectively been stolen from the general public in that sense.
100%. And I think the real estate market's a great example. I think that website may even call out components of the real estate market. But Michael Saylor, CEO of MicroStrategy, has mentioned this several times in interviews I've watched with him. And he lives in this, this beautiful estate in Miami Beach. And I think when he bought the house was first constructed like in the early 1900s for around $100,000. And then I think he acquired it around 2012, and I think it was like 10 to 12 million when he bought it. And today it's worth well over 100 million. And it's not that the house got any bigger or the land got any bigger or anything on the property necessarily became more valuable. It's that the dollar became devalued. So I don't think people think about that as much. Like if you have a real estate property and then all of a sudden it's worth 10 million 1 year, and then 15 years from now it's worth 20 to 50 million. It's not the value of that property necessarily got more valuable. It didn't get bigger. Maybe there's some renovations you made that made it more valuable, but that would be incremental. What's really happening is the value of what the monetary system to acquire that asset is just slowly leaking over time. And that's the reverse of how most people think about it. A lot of people think of traditional asset investing classes of, oh, this is how much this asset went up over time. You want to make sure you outpace inflation. That's a component of it. But that inflation component is very, very important. It's kind of like a reverse thinking, like how much did this asset go up versus how much did the value of the dollar actually get lost? And you want to be able to find things that can surpass that paradigm, because that's how you're really going to generate value moving forward. And Bitcoin is a great option to do that in.
Yeah, this is where I always get annoying. I get annoying when I talk to people, because then they say, yeah, but we have this housing crisis and not enough homes are being built and all these things. And then they say, yeah, that's also, downstream from the brokenness of the money is the fact that, if your reward in a value exchange loses value into perpetuity, your incentive to deliver value also how do you say, gets less over time, right? So the people that are in charge of spending your money in the government, even they subconsciously probably know that this value is fleeting, right? So that's why people are spending constantly. It's not only the consumers that are spending constantly, but it's also the governments that are spending constantly. And people don't have the incentive to actually be diligent with the money that they spend. So there are all these random plans that fail, but of course they never communicated that they failed, right? So it's always going great. Or, some plans turn out to be, 4, 5, 6 times as costly as initially communicated, and all these things. But there is no incentive to be honest. There's no incentive to be like, okay, I spent, 5 billion on some railroad track and nobody's, or some railroad and nobody's using the train. Well, sorry, I tried. No, they're going to put in another 10 billion to just force people to use it, for example. And so, again, yeah, that's where I get annoying in these discussions where people are just like, yeah, but the people in charge are just incompetent. I should vote for another party and then, it'll all be fixed. But that is like this circle, right? Because, sometimes it's the 50% of one people that say that. And then, the next round after elections, it's the other 50% of people that say, but if I vote for this guy, then it'll change. And all the while, these people that are in charge are basically spending your money, or newly created money, which devalues your money, on things that don't really bring actual value, better roads, schools, whatever, in your individual life. And that, I think, is just really hard for people to grok, that is how it works. It's not necessarily that the people in charge are how do you say it, like bad people or whatever. It's just the incentives that are there, and they follow the incentives. It's very basic.
It's a function of the failing system that we're a part of, right? Like, I think that what's really hard for people to grapple in their heads is that if you're thinking about, like you just noted, from a political spectrum of, I'm going to vote for this party because this party didn't do well, or vice versa, people think they have choice, but in my opinion, it's really the illusion of choice, because you are thinking you're choosing one party over another, but in reality, the people that are calling the shots are going to play out the same agenda over time. And it's also a function of the monetary system, because, depending on which party takes office, they're inheriting things from previous parties. They're also inheriting a failing system. So there's only so much you can do with the failing system. And governments all around the world, we're seeing that happen, where they switch from party to party to party to party, but they just keep printing. They just keep printing more and more money over time, and things become more and more expensive. And we're seeing the ripple effects through society, where you have people working 2 and 3 jobs and can't make ends meet because the value of the system is failing. And so, Bitcoin provides that solution to that. And, hopefully that'll actually create a more fundamental, fair political system in time as well, because then we'll have parties that can use it as real solutions to some of these problems that we have.
Do you have any ideas how we can help people get to a state of mind that opens them up more to yeah, kind of being able to confront these deeply held and many times just subconscious beliefs that kind of prevent them from getting Bitcoin, or maybe before that, even getting the problem, right? Like what we are talking about now.
Yeah, I think that, if you're looking for educational content to really help you on your path there's a couple things that you should really, really consider that will help you open your eyes. I think for anybody, like the Creature from Jekyll Island was a very eye-opening book for me for the central banking system and how that works. You have some great examples of books that are just behind you on your shelf, like the Big Print. That's a very good book. Saifedean's books, the Bitcoin Standard, things like that are very, very helpful. A really great book that was written years ago that I think is helpful for the future that we are in today and is very aggressively growing is The Sovereign Individual. They updated that with Bitcoin components to it, and that's a really good book as well. But one of the very eye-opening books that I had years ago, and it really has nothing to do with the monetary system, but it helped change my thinking quite a bit about the world, is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And if people haven't read that book, basically the concept of the book is that Napoleon Hill was Andrew Carnegie's apprentice, one time the wealthiest person in the world from Carnegie Steel. And being in that relationship, he got to travel around the world and meet the most successful people in the world to study their habits and how they think about life. And one of the things that book really discusses is how you create a reality that you have by thinking it first, right? Like how you write things down, how you set goals. And that book really changed how I thought about life. And as I read that more and more, that led me down different paths to start exploring other things. But I think one of the most challenging things for most people is how do you disrupt your own mental model and change your own personal status quo, because that's different for every person. Every person is a product of their experiences, their closest relationships, their educations over time, and it's going to be different from person to person. But if you can find something that makes you question the things that you believe in, to start thinking, okay, why do I believe this? What is it that makes me think this is true or accurate? And how do I actually know? And I think there's a big difference between saying, I believe something, or I think something, or I know something to be true, right? Like there's a fundamental difference on that spectrum. And a lot of people blindly believe structures in life or power structures or different types of systems that they are ingrained with every single day. And they've never taken a step back to question, like, why does the system operate the way it operates? What is the reason for that? And is it the best way that it should operate? Or are there alternative systems that I can opt out of in order to live a life that's more wholesome in the direction that I want to go?
Yeah, I think in the Western world, I've talked about this before, it is quite hard to do that, don't you think? Like it's just working for you. Like if I think about my youth, just growing up in one of the richest countries in the world, not rich, but compared to the rest of the world, probably very rich, right? I never had to question a roof or water or food or education or sports or entertainment or just basically nothing, right? And when you then grow up and you follow a certain path, I think that's also why I'm focused on millennials. I think we have really followed a certain path that was always communicated to us, maybe by our family, but definitely by media and movies and stuff like that. I think that was basically the culture. I think Gen Z already has it a bit differently because they grow up with the internet at their fingertips, in the sense that they could more easily get other information. I think they still have it hard in a sense that they are younger, and I think their future is as uncertain as ours. But for them, I think it's way more daunting in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But for millennials, you go to school, you take on debt, or you get a job, you maybe start a family, you take debt to get a house, and just like all these classical steps, right? I think for our generation, and I wonder how you think about that, and also with your generational peers around you, how have you changed in viewing that path? Of course, you were a bit younger when you started questioning everything, right? But if everything is working for you, and you are now like you're in your mid-30s, That's why I like to check the Reddit out, right? And you're questioning like, okay, I did all these things, but I don't feel like I'm progressing. I feel stuck. Like this is not what's been told or sold to me. How can people even start breaking out of that? Based on all the things we talked about. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of the first things people can do, and this is going to be different for each person. So think about where do you get your information from? If you're an individual and you're looking at traditional mainstream news sources for information, you're being propagandized in a sense, right? Like the information that's being received is always going to be a specific kind of narrative. And so you have to take a step back and realize, okay, if everything that I'm hearing, I'm not say everything, but if a lot of things that I'm hearing from mainstream commercial sources is not accurate, what does that mean? Why am I being fed this information? And how can I readjust where I'm accessing information to hopefully get more transparency and truth? A great example of this is I read some interesting studies around if you were an individual that watched the mainstream news sources for this most recent US presidential election versus an individual who only got their information from Twitter or X, right? The person that watched mainstream news sources would have thought in the United States that there was 100% chance that Kamala Harris was going to win. And the person that got their information from X, we thought there was 100% chance almost that Trump was going to win. And so that's just by where you're getting your information from, which is very interesting. And so one of the things that I think that changed for me many years ago is I quit watching the news altogether. I just like quit looking at it because I was like, what? And I also have a big belief in this. If all the news stations around the world start funneling the same story simultaneously, you are being distracted from something much more important going on. Because we are a product of our perception. And our perception gets narrowed by the screens we look at, by the devices that we use, and by the access to information that we suck in. And if that information can be controlled and narrated in certain ways, it'll bend your fundamental perception of reality. And I started paying very close attention on the news. And I thought, every time I watch the news, there's nothing positive ever being discussed. It's very much like wars and negative. And every now and then they'd sprinkle in something positive. But for the most part, it wasn't very positive. And so I was like, why am I wasting my time watching this? It's not even good for like my mental state when all you see is negativity all the time. And I had this interesting thesis where how long does a social media engine run before it turns into like a clickbait factory where everyone's like, this person did this, you won't believe what happened next, or here's the top 10 reasons of this. And like every social media engine, they start off, I think, with good intent, and then over time they turn into like a clickbait factory. And I think we've seen that with all sorts of different stuff. And so when that starts occurring, then again I start questioning, is the information that I'm getting authentic, or has it been fractured by marketing and advertisers and clicks and views and things like that? So you always have to be kind of looking yourself in the mirror and stress testing your own ideas to say, is what I'm spending my time on every day, are the people I'm surrounded with every day the best for my growth personally and spiritually and fiscally? And where am I getting my information from? I think where you get your information and how you question that was a big fundamental shift for me. That most people, if you're consuming all your information from one avenue and you're getting a certain narrative pushed to you at all times, you need to start questioning yourself, is it possible that this information's false? Or is a lot of disinformation that's infiltrated into this? And then just start opening your eyes to what are other places to get information. Well, now we can look at podcasts. We can look at experts in this different spaces that are talking about this. We can look at different social media engines. And that's not to say there's a lot of not disinformation on those as well, but we have optionality to choose where we're getting our information today. And I think we are seeing a big shift with that, especially in the millennial generation. There's much more people that are accessing news related content through podcasts and social media engines than on mainstream commercial sources. And so we're already seeing that shift. The one thing to me that's a little concerning, and I don't have enough of an expertise in this, is we're seeing a fundamental, I think, a search engine moment happening with AI right now. And what I mean by that is when Google was created and you could go in and type in a question, that was a massive fundamental shift in our society, right? Like how we could access information and share information. The other day, I had a 2-hour conversation between ChatGPT, Perplexity, and Grok. And I was asking each of them very similar questions, just trying to figure out what information each of them spit back to me and how it was similar and how it was different. And they all have similarities, but they all have differences as well. But the very interesting thing is that all these systems are closed source, so we don't get to see the code and the potential bias that's integrated in responding to queries. And that creates some concern, right? Because there's several times I've asked some of these AI engines questions and it's spit back an answer to me in 10 seconds, totally confident that it's accurate, and it's flat out wrong. The data's incorrect, the narrative's incorrect, however they structured it. And so I'll have to fact check it. But if it's doing that to me, how many people are asking these things questions and it's spitting out false information and they're just believing it as truth? What does that do to us as a human being? It further narrows our perception. And so I think we're going to have to be very diligent about how we use these AI engines and how we push on them over time to make sure that they're, unbiased, which is going to be next to impossible to happen. They're always going to have some type of bias in them, but to make sure the information is accurate, because the company that controls the algorithm has a tremendous amount of control over our perception of reality moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you. If you're not a critical thinker now, it's going to be very hard to become one in this age of AI, right? I think it's mainly just trust that people have outsourced in a sense, right? And I think that's kind of the theme that we're talking about, just reflecting on that, figuring out where that trust was actually built or maybe mutually agreed, right? I think it's also just an interesting thought to think about, okay, when did I agree to use this money in my country? Oh, I never agreed. I'm forced to use this money, right? I think just going through that journey by yourself, being confronted with a certain belief or preconception or notion you have that eventually turns out to not be true, and just being able to sit with that and go through that, how do you say, that uncomfortable phase of just kind of feeling like an idiot. I mean, that's how I felt when I learned about fractional reserve banking while I worked at a bank.
One of the things too, it's a rather elementary way to think about it. But when you're a child, anybody that has children or has nieces and nephews, a common question that children at a young age will ask is, well, why? Mm-hmm. Why do I have to do that? Why is this like this? Yes. I think people, as they get older, they have a much harder time asking the question why. But if we think like children in that regard more, it actually helps you with critical thinking. Why is our money system like this? Why is our government like this? Like, just ask the question why more, and don't always agree with the answer. Like, go down the rabbit hole to figure out what you feel is right and what you feel is wrong, and how to potentially fix some of these challenges. And so just by asking why more often, as opposed to doing what you noted earlier, which is outsourcing truth, I think the very nature of that helps people become better critical thinkers.
So talking to our generational peers, I know I just asked it, but I had a very long intro to that question. I wonder how you experience that. Do you have people around you that are all into Bitcoin or not? Like, how do they view you, or how are your conversations? And maybe also, do you have an example of someone that you knew in real life that eventually got into Bitcoin, and where you actually kind of like saw that shift in thinking about money differently?
Oh, a bunch of people. I've been very fortunate to be in the space for quite some time. So I have a lot of Bitcoin community friends of mine that have been doing this for a long time. And a lot of us spend a lot of our energy educating others around the world. But what I also think is important too is we're still very, very early. People see the price of Bitcoin hovering today around 118, 120,000, and they think, oh, I missed the boat. I've been to certain areas in the world where I've been educating people on Bitcoin, and they've literally said, Brian, I just want to give you money and you tell me how many Bitcoin I own. Like, there's countries I've been to where I've been asked that. So we're still at an extremely early phase. Most of the world does not understand how important this is yet. So even though Bitcoin's trading where it is today, it's still super early to get exposure to this. And the simplest way to think about it is there's 21 million Bitcoin and there's 8 billion people on the planet, right? You can't create more of them. So if every millionaire in the world today woke up and actually understood Bitcoin and went to buy one, there'd be such a supply shock, we wouldn't have enough Bitcoin to go around, and the price would just skyrocket. But we're still so early because not every millionaire in the world today understands Bitcoin yet. And when you take the time to critically think and start questioning about that, I think that's where it really opens your eyes to figure out, like, okay, this is something that's a truly innovative technology that we've never seen before. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but our team, my partner Brian, who's our CIO, him and his wife put together an amazing film called God Bless Bitcoin that they released. And it's about a 90-minute documentary that basically goes into what Bitcoin is, why it's important, the technology, the monetary system, and they break it down super simply for people to understand. Because sometimes when you read some of these books I noted before, a lot of people may read that and some of the information is rather dense. And so they may not know how to interpret it or understand everything. But that movie, God Bless Bitcoin, which really breaks it down simply, is maybe a good place to start for people to actually, start critically thinking and understanding what Bitcoin actually is a technology, a monetary system, an innovation in all these different areas of way it can be perceived. So I highly recommend checking that out. You can watch it for free actually at godblessbitcoin.com. But yeah, I think that's one of the things people really need to spend their time on is if there's one thing in your life that you should really understand, it's money. Because we spend a lot of time and energy earning it, right? Like most people, as you enter in the millennial generation right now, people probably are having children and they have a family and they're working really hard in different areas of whatever they're spending their time on. You should understand the work that you put out and the dollars that you earn, how that system actually works. And if you don't understand it, that's a problem because you're putting your life into it, trying to earn these dollars, right? So if you have a system where you can work for 20 years of your life and the government can go in and issue 40% of the dollars that were ever created into circulation, like happened during COVID, and wipe away 20 years of your work, that should piss you off beyond belief that somebody has the ability to do that because you just work for 20 years of your life. And then by all this money that was issued during the COVID time span, that energy, time, labor was wiped clean. And most people don't understand. They hear it, they don't really get it. But imagine that much of your value. Imagine taking 20 years of your hard work and effort that just gets deleted. And since there's even a system that allows for that, it's surprising to me that not more people are up in arms because of that. But it's because our society is highly distracted. And that's something that I think Bitcoin changes over time. As people read it, they understand it, they start to believe in it. And we have this massive movement that's been created. And that'll just continue to, roll up like a snowball over time as more and more people understand it and want to adopt it as the new standard.
Just this point is so mind-blowing, don't you think? If you just really think about it, if you are a diligent financial person and you are saving, etc., and you are just, paying attention to what you spend it on and you're frugal or whatever, like if that is your personality and you're doing that correctly and following all the best practices and budgeting and all these things, there are other people that can devalue whatever you've saved. Mm-hmm. And they don't care about your individual prosperity. Like that is just how it works, right? And so I think just that and just realizing that if you spend your finite time and energy for a reward that other people, again, that don't care about your individual prosperity can create infinitely, that's the dumbest thing that you can do.
Yeah.
So I wonder how many people will wake up to this. What do you think? Like, I don't think it'll ever be everyone or how many people we would love to see it in that sense. And I sometimes struggle with that. I find that very, very hard because those people will stay behind in a sense in whatever CBDC cage they're going to build for those people, right? Like that. I don't know how to look at that to the future in that sense. Maybe
there's the age-old quote in the Bitcoin space that says you get Bitcoin at the price that you deserve it. And what that quote means is that everybody is going to learn about its value at a different point in time. And when you actually spend the time to understand it, and then you say, oh, wow, I need to have some of this because it's going to be life-changing for me. And you go in and buy it. That's what that quote refers to as the price that you deserve it. So whether that was $5, $500, $5,000, $50,000, or even today at 120,000, hopefully more people wake up to that today than people that wake up to it at $1 million a coin or $5 million a coin or $10 million a coin, as long as adoption continues. But that's really kind of what that quote means, right? Is that everybody's going to learn and have their wake-up call with this at a different point in time. Mm-hmm. Hopefully more people start to understand it sooner than later.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what else should happen for these people to wake up? And maybe there are always also people that never really wake up to that reality, right? Or they don't really want to see it. Mm-hmm. How would you paint the contrast between living in a world of fiat money, endless debasement, and the world of Bitcoin? Like, if we can inspire someone who is earlier on their journey, how would you put these two things opposed to each other?
I think one way to consider it is, let's look at it just solely from an investment standpoint. You know, Bitcoin's been the best performing asset, I believe, 13 out of the last 16 years. I think like the approximate number. So if you're just looking to invest, a lot of people will start going with very traditional asset classes. It's stocks, bonds, real estate, things of that nature. None of those have outperformed Bitcoin. None of them have. And if you just look at the economics of how Bitcoin works, you can't create more of them. You know, approximately, 94 to 95% of all Bitcoin that have ever been created are in circulation today. And there's this many people on the planet. So when more and more people wake up to this, the value of Bitcoin as it gets adopted only has one direction to move, as long as this trend continues, which is north. And you know, there's many years, in my opinion, still that Bitcoin will have tremendous outperformance over all these other asset classes. So if you're looking for a place to put your capital and you're thinking about stocks and bonds and real estate and all these different asset classes, you need to be looking at Bitcoin and educating yourself on it. Otherwise, in my opinion, you're missing out on the number one most superior asset in the whole world that the vast majority of people still don't understand. And what I also think is very interesting is, if you're a financial advisor, you have a fiduciary duty to your clients to find assets that can outperform things like the S&P 500 and that are non-correlated to other asset classes and that have what are called an enhanced Sharpe ratio. So what a Sharpe ratio is for every unit of risk you take, you want to develop a better unit of a return, right? And Bitcoin has a remarkable Sharpe ratio. It means it's not correlated and you're getting a better unit of return for the amount of risk that you're taking for that asset. And when an asset like that has been around for as many years as Bitcoin has and has as much data on its performance as Bitcoin has, if you're a financial advisor and you're still telling your clients not to get exposure to this, in my opinion, you're violating your fiduciary duty, because Bitcoin hits all the metrics that you need to be finding for a client's portfolio. And so if you look at it solely from an investment standpoint, because everyone's always trying to figure out, how do I take the dollars that I've earned and help them grow over time? In order to do that, you have to be investing in assets. And Bitcoin's been the best performing asset for many, many years. So you need to be taking a look at it from that perspective. And then over time, a lot of times people think, well, how do I make money off this, right? And maybe some people, that's their entry point into Bitcoin. Like, oh, I see Bitcoin's performing well, maybe I can make a buck off it. Maybe that's their gateway into it. And then over time, all of a sudden it's, oh, wow, this is amazing technology. Oh, wow, this is an amazing monetary system. So I think each age demographic learns about it differently, enters the market in a different way. Back in the 2020 and 2021 bull cycle for digital assets, I knew a group of people that were younger that had never touched Bitcoin, but were trading NFTs. And then all of a sudden, when they realized that NFTs deflated in value and that market went down, they were rotating their stuff into Bitcoin because Bitcoin was their store of value in the digital world. And so, each party is going to learn about it differently and get exposure to it differently. But the most important thing is you got to get off zero. You got to start.
So how can we help our generation create or get healthy skepticism about the topics that we talked about, and avoid hype like NFTs or Bored Ape Yacht Club and stuff like that, but also like staying open to like real transformative change? Like, do you think this is something that you go at being very careful, or should you open your mind and just be a bit more brutal about it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I'm never take the view of being careful. I think it's more like for this concept, it's more important that you have to just kind of crack open your head and be much more brutal and really question your mental model and status quo of how you've lived your life and how you think about things. And until you can do that, it's going to be much more challenging. Like I think if you just trickle it in over time, it's much more difficult than giving you that sharp wake up experience. And Bitcoin does that for a lot of people. I know so many people that have, been stuck in a certain status quo for their whole life. And then when they really took the time to understand Bitcoin, that was the eureka moment for them. And all of a sudden now they're going down all sorts of rabbit holes they never even would have thought of before because of how much Bitcoin opened their mind and how much of a fundamental change in consciousness Bitcoin is becoming. So yeah, I think that's what people have to do. You have to really sit down and look at your life and say, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And one of the things that doesn't make sense is how people can work as hard as they are and still can't make ends meet. And you got to ask yourself, well, why is that? Why today can someone be working 3 jobs and still not making their ends meet? Whereas in 1971, you could have a family where one person worked and the other person had multiple kids and raised the kids and was a full-time stay-at-home parent. And they did not only not have enough, they could have abundance in that time period. Why did that happen then, but it doesn't happen now? The simple answer is because there is no value backing our monetary system. And that's what Bitcoin provides. So if you want to have a future for your family and your children where you can go take more risks, pursue creative endeavors, and allow yourself to build generational wealth opportunities, probably beyond anything we've ever seen in many, many, many years, then Bitcoin is something that you need to be looking into.
So 2 short questions before we wrap it up. What is a spicy point of view that you have on Bitcoin that you think not many people share with you?
I don't know if a lot of people share this with me, but I think it's a really important point because a lot of people I don't think are thinking about it. Because a lot of people look at Bitcoin if they're in the space as a monetary system or a technology. But we talked about AI earlier. We're seeing how fast AI is advancing. If you're one of these AI agents, so an AI agent, basically an algorithm that's doing a virtual task, when every time you ask ChatGPT something, that AI agent is processing, computing, and figuring out the answer and coming back to you. In order for it to do that, it has to use energy to do that. And energy has a cost associated with it, right? Electricity has a cost that powers the computer servers that then ChatGPT calls to get the answers to these questions. If you believe that AI is going to be exponentially valuable in our life, which I think most people that have seen it or engaged with it would probably agree with that statement, you should inherently believe that Bitcoin will be incredibly valuable moving forward. And the reason I say that is because an AI agent that's processing these virtual tasks is not going to be able to set up a Bank of America account. But they will have to charge at some point to process the electricity and the computing power it takes when it's getting requested to do all these virtual tasks. Well, what's a perfect solution for an internet native AI system exponentially growing in size in the future? Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a great opportunity for these AI agents to have a digital cryptocurrency wallet that they exchange Bitcoin to, that you pay it in. And the thing about this too is it's not going to be long. There's approximately a little over 8 billion people on the planet, right? The market of these AI agents will be in the trillions before we know it. There will be trillion, and they'll have their own virtual economies exchanging and doing things that we don't even know that's going on before long. And so if you believe in the future of AI, you should inherently believe in the future of Bitcoin as well.
Couldn't agree more. All right, my last question, and I ask everyone the same question, which is, what is a core belief that you will never let go of?
I have learned as I've evolved more over time that I think everything that exists within our reality is a projection of how we think every day. And I think that's true of every person. So if you think about every person on the planet, there's, maybe 8 billion different projections of their reality. And there's a way that I think about others and a way that I think about myself and a way that other people think about me. And probably each person's perception of me is different based on their mental model of me. And the one thing that I think that I'll have a very difficult time ever changing, that's only evolved to get stronger over time, is that my entire reality in my existence is a function of what my mind projects every single day. So I do my best to make sure that those thoughts are positive and the thoughts of others are positive, because that puts my bubble of reality perception in a much better place than I would have been yesterday. And hopefully each day gets a little bit better.
Awesome. Well, to put the positive vibes out there, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and I really enjoyed this conversation, man. So thank you.
Likewise. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Cheers. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, please like this video if you want to help shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, and subscribe to my channel to stay connected. I hope to see you for a next episode. Bye.